Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a short story because it is Short Story Tuesday. And it's also Black History Month, so I wanted to focus on another short story by a Black author. And today's short story is all about dropping out of school and neocolonialism. I am referring to Awa by Keisha Bush, which was published in 2022. For those who don't know, Keisha Bush is an American author who didn't start writing until she got into this her sort of second career, because her first career involved her going to Senegal in the early 2000s, and the region of West Africa, and doing a lot of corporate work. I don't quite know what exactly she was doing, and her bio is kind of vague about it, which leads me to ask a number of questions. But it's probably too late to ask those questions. But once she decided that doing nonprofit work was more her speed in Senegal, later on she made her way back to America, where she began writing mostly about her experiences in Africa, and you end up with short stories like Awa or No Heaven for Good Boys or something like that. That's one of her more recent works, and so you see her talking about colonialism and the experience of young people in Africa in her work. This is really the first time I've encountered her work, but I do like the short story that I encountered today, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that, about why I liked it later on. But without further ado, let's talk about Awa. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Awa focuses, of course, on the young girl named Awa. She is a Senegalese teenager who at the start of the story is talking about a science fair project that she's going to be working on, and she's sharing her thoughts with her friends, who are all pretty happy about this project. But when she gets home, her parents tell her that due to her father getting fired recently, they're gonna have to ask Awa to drop out because they can't afford to pay her school fees, and she has to work in order to make ends meet, presumably until her father gets another job. They say this will last about 3 months, but it's probably going to last a bit more, and indeed it does, as you can see through the story. But they managed to get Awa some work she's going to be a maid for a wealthy family in a nearby sort of wealthy city in Senegal. And the good news is, she doesn't have to pay for lodging because it's close to where she lives. And by close, I mean 35 minutes away, but that's nothing if you're willing to try to save money and whatnot. As Awa begins to work for this wealthy family, she begins to feel more isolated, especially from her former friends. There's a time for her to text because she has a phone, but this is a pay-as-you-go type phone. So she doesn't have the money to pay for more minutes because all of her money is going to her parents. So she can only text on certain days that she's allotted for herself. And unfortunately, that means her friends aren't really chatting with her too much, aren't really talking with her, and eventually they just cut her out entirely because she's not really communicating with them, and they're not running in the same social settings anymore, which is unfortunate. But she does begin to make friends with a stray cat in the area that follows her around, and which has told her, it has said that its name is Cabbage. Which is a bit funny. She thinks that it's talking to him or talking to her, but she can't really know for sure, and it might just be all in her mind, but it's a bit unclear there. And time begins to pass as Awa continues to work for this family. Her parents said it was just 3 months, but it spills over into an entire year, and Awa likes her job. She's happy about it, but she really wants to go back to school. And at one point, she begins borrowing books from her employer, reading books like Things Fall Apart, among many others that her employers let her borrow from their library. So Awa is able to get some education and read and gain that experience that she might not have done otherwise. Unfortunately, one day she shows up to the job and they tell her that a previous employee who had to leave because their parent was sick wants to come back into the job. And so they're going to take away some of Awa's hours and eventually fire her so that they can rehire this other person. And Awa is deeply sad, but Cabbage reminds her that she has made it through similar experiences before. So although this might be hard, she is fully prepared to endure whatever comes her way next. And when she goes back home to tell her parents, they tell her that her father actually got a steady job, and so they're going to send Awa back to school, and she doesn't have to tell them that she got fired from her job. So it ends on a bit of an optimistic note there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with Awa. One of the big themes that Bush is working with here is that of hardship. Awa is isolated and she's forced to work to help her family. Like, that's not easy for anybody. You typically think of the childhood and teenage experiences, hanging out with friends and making mistakes and all of that, not having to work to keep your family afloat, and just in general, provide funds to make sure that your family doesn't lose their house or whatnot. And I know this is, a cross-cultural sort of thing. Like this is a Senegalese story. So it might not be, the experience of the American teenager and that of the Senegalese teenager might be completely different. But I would argue that, they should be much more similar, and that you should not have teenagers working to keep the family afloat. Like, your society should be much better than that. So if you see teenagers working and having to work these long, hard jobs, that usually indicates a failure on some part. But I'll get to that in a moment. And so because Awa is forced to work this job, she's dealing with a lot of stress and sadness, being isolated from her friends, not being able to chat with them as much because of her phone plan, and the worries that she might this might go on forever, that she might not be able to return back to school, and she's going to miss out on that experience. Just in general, it's not creating a great time for her. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. Returning to school fades to the back of Awa's mind. She hasn't seen her friends in more than a year. She cannot afford to buy phone credit, and between her work schedule and helping out at home, she has no time to visit them. The idea of taking a selfie or posting a picture to her social media accounts feels foreign and distant. And that's an interesting quote, because it gets at the fact that Awa's life is changing, and that the life that she used to have feels unfamiliar to her now, and that any hope that she had of returning to school and then getting that semblance is quickly fading, which only adds to the hardship that Awa is ultimately facing here. And when she talks with Cabbage, the cat that can or cannot talk, who is to say, Cabbage talks about enduring. Like, when she's about to be fired from her May job, it's like, you dealt with this before and you survived, so surely you will survive this, which is a great message to be sending out there, because sometimes you're going to be dealing with tough situations that you're worried about making it through, but you might have been through similar tough situations, so you have that experience, which is what matters in life. However, what this ignores is that Awa is a young girl and shouldn't have to deal with this kind of hardship. She shouldn't have to help out at home in that way. She shouldn't have to be the main money earner in the house in order to help her parents thrive. something is inherently wrong in this society, which I'll get to in a moment. But Awa is just a young girl. She shouldn't have to be going through this. And I think Keisha Bush is very much aware of that because of my next point. But like it's good that she's aware of that, because if you had been like, oh, it's normal to go through this experience, there'd be something wrong with that message, and we'd have to wonder why young children have to go through the meat thresher when you could just shut the meat thresher off. The other point that I'm trying to talk about here that Keisha Bush is addressing in this short story is colonialism or neocolonialism, because Senegal is very much independent and on its own, like a lot of African countries, but it's still dealing with the effects of neocolonialism, whether it be oil jobs or industry sort of jobs that come into the country to exploit the resources and say, oh, if you want these good paying jobs, you need to let us have access to this. And then when those resources are all gone, the companies leave and the people are again left with nothing, and they have to move on to the next country or go a couple of countries away to get a quality job that they can send their money back home to their family for. Then you have like talk of the World Health Organization and UNICEF, which does have some issues with neocolonialism and forcing countries to behave in a certain way in order to get access to the valuable resources that they might have. And then you have the wealthy outsiders who need maids like Awa. Like they could very much use their money to benefit the society that they're in, but they come in as outsiders and want to exist on top of the sort of class strata that exist in this society, and again use up the resources and force the very low class people to work for them in order so that they don't have to work themselves. And these people could come in and they could fund the school system so Awa doesn't have to drop out, or fund any number of systems, but they choose not to do that. And so in that way they're part of the problem of this neo-colonialist society. And then you see the health effects on Awa and similar people in this story of being isolated from her friends, not really being able to connect to the other people who are being employed here. Although she does seem to make some friends with the other servants, she's still a teenager, so she can't really relate to those individuals. And she's also forced to drop out of school in order to help her family make ends meet. Ignoring the fact that nobody should have to drop out of school in a healthy society, that people are exploiting this, and so children have to work as a result. And you might say like, oh, you're just making up things where they quite aren't there. Maybe Keisha Bush wasn't really talking about neocolonialism, but she does reference two books in this story. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, a classic neocolonialist work that is highly praised, which I feel is intentional there. But if that wasn't enough, she also talks about The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, a work from a philosopher about the effects of neocolonialism and dehumanization on the human mind. And so, yeah, I feel like that's an intentional effort right there, where she's talking about how colonialism and neocolonialism and Senegalese society is affecting this young woman who should otherwise be in school. And then there's just like one problem with this story. The ending does feel a little too optimistic in that Awa is able to go back to school and her family has a job, so everything seems pretty hunky-dory there. Although you could argue that it's maybe not optimistic, because this might happen to Awa again down the road, given the effects of colonialism in society. This might be a recurring cycle. It might even happen to Awa herself down the road, where she has to ask her child to work and to help make ends meet. But the way it ends here, it ends on too much of an optimistic note. But there is that underlying, neocolonialist influence that prevents this story from having that too much of an optimistic ending. So I can see what Keisha Bush was trying to get at there as well. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Awa by Keisha Bush, a really solid short story, one that was really challenging and hard, a little bit hard to read, because just to be aware of that neocolonialism and seeing how Awa, like many young women in Africa, have to drop out of school in order to make their or help their family make ends meet. It is really, really rough. But Keisha Bush isn't afraid to, address that and talk about that and point out how a lot of people might be going to Africa to make the world a better place, but actually create this sort of class colonialist system that that we thought had gone away in the mid 1900s, but was actually furthered by this neocolonialism. If you have any thoughts on this short story, write them in the comments below. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author and this short story if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and dropping out of school travels. Farewell.